Hi, I'm Corey Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me. We talk about faith and politics and all kinds of topics that really matter in our culture. So if you're tired of all the screamers out there taking all the oxygen out of the room and you want to join us in taking some of that space back, you'll love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. And that's the important part, without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and I am really grateful to have a place to talk about faith and politics and all these big ideas in our world with all kinds of really interesting, accomplished people of goodwill and good faith. And we have some special people today. So please remember to subscribe if you haven't already to this podcast. And if you have and you like what we do, tell a friend, give us a good rating, leave a review. All these things are ways that get word out and help other people participate in the conversation. The easiest way to find us is our main site, which is www.politicsandreligion.us. It's all one word and the end is spelled out. politicsandreligion.us. All of that helps get the word out so more people can just dive in and we can continue doing what we're doing today. This is a really special conversation. We have as my special guests my Mishpachah. You might have heard me use that term before, but since one of our guests grew up in a house where Yiddish was spoken, I'll ask my cousin Sheila how to say that word properly and what that word means.
Well, in Yiddish it's Mishpachah, you said it well, and in Hebrew it's Mishpachah, and that means family. That's exactly what it means, family.
How about that? All right, so now that we have that a little bit of background, I always say family, extended family with a little bit of chicken fat mixed in there.
Okay.
You have to have a little schmaltz in there, like that's what makes it it's special, right? So why don't we do this? Why don't we introduce everybody and see if you know? I'm going to start with Deena and Jonathan actually, and see if you know exactly how we're related. So since you're the, I was going to say since you're the eldest, am I allowed to say that, Deena? So why don't you introduce yourself and do you know exactly how we're related?
Hi everybody, I'm Deena. I am Sheila's daughter, and I live here in Israel. For the Israeli branch, and my mom is cousins with Corey's father.
That's right. That's right. Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself? Where in Israel are you? So Deena's on a train right now, but where are you located, Deena?
Yeah, I live in Modi'in, city of Modi'in, which is right between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Sorry about that.
It's the train. We're getting it live. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And Jonathan.
Hi there, Jonathan. I live in the south part of Israel, near Beersheba, in a town called Lahavim. I am Sheila's son. The relationship is, we're cousins, but we can get a little more specific. And that actually, it's the my mother's mother and your father's grandmother are sisters. So there we go.
Right.
And they came over together.
Yeah,
they came over together.
And then since we have Allan, Allan is so the Warshawskis. Where in Europe are the Warshawskis from?
Just using the name Warshawski, which has the word Warsaw in the middle of it, it gives you an indication that the family that eventually settled in the United States came from Eastern Europe. My father's family came from Poland, from a little shtetl called Turik, Turik. It was east of Lvov, and they got out. My father actually came himself to get out, and he actually made his way to Palestine at the time, and just before the break of World War I, and he volunteered and served in the Zion Mule Corps against to try and kick the Turks out of out of this area. And my mom's family came from Belarus, from a town called shtetl. And they ultimately met in the United States. And then in 1979, we made the big decision to leave the States and make our way to Israel. And we've been here since July 2nd, 1979.
Wow. All right. So, Sheila, so you were the main organizer of our big family reunion. And anybody can chime in here, but I wanted to start with a little bit of historical context. Our family, the Blicks, is from a part of Ukraine. It's now Ukraine. At the time they left, it was part of the young Soviet Union. It was a province in the young Soviet Union. It was part of the Russian Empire before World War I. It's called Cherny Ostriv, on the kind of central western Ukraine. So Sheila, how much do we know about Cherny Ostriv, and do you have any sense of how long our family was there before they left in 1920?
I know quite a bit about the shtetl because my mother used to speak about it all the time, especially when the film Fiddler on the Roof came out, but other times also. And also I used to speak a lot with your great-grandmother and your grandmother, and all our aunts and uncles spoke about it a lot. Shtetl was a very small town. It was called a shtetl, which meant the community where the Jews lived, and they were fairly poor, I think, because they lived in sort of like a shack or something that you would have seen in the Fiddler on the Roof movie. And they had a fairly hard life. And when there was very severe pogroms, which means when the Russian Cossacks came running through on their horses with their swords, they would just hit randomly at people. And your grandmother and my mother were 15 and 17 or 16 years old. And they vividly remember that. Having to hide behind the haystacks when they came into town. So they have vivid memories, and they told vivid stories about it, and the life came through to us, and they all had to escape, and they did successfully, because one of my mother's older brothers, he had left Ukraine years before the family left, came to the United States, and he worked and he saved all his money, and he brought the family over. And we always speak about Uncle Avi, that he brought the family over. If it wasn't for him, I don't know what would have happened to the family.
So just for some historical, our family, the patriarch and matriarch that we're referring to, it's the Blick side of the family. And how do you say your grandfather's name on Rose's side? Ben-Zion or
Ben-Sion.
Ben-Sion.
Yeah.
And Fega.
That's the Fega.
Right.
That's the
So they were the patriarch matriarch. Now Hannah, my great grandmother, who I was named after, her and her husband Chaim Rubin, he's from the Krivals side of my family. They already had a family. My grandmother,
yes, they did.
Bessie, was already born. Her younger sister Rose was already born, and now your mother.
And they had a baby.
They had a baby.
She had a small baby who died in Ellis Island.
Right.
Yeah.
And your mother was already, she was born in 1905.
She was 16.
So that's why my grandmother and Rose were very close. They were relatively close in age, about 8 years apart. So do you know what? And how do you say it again? Ben-Sion? Like, do you know what he did?
Ben-Sion. Well, I sort of know what he did, because my mother, at different times in her later life, for instance, when Khrushchev was visiting the States in the 1960s and speaking on television, she understood his Russian, And she also, when she was visiting us in Israel and was in the hospital, broke her hip, and she was sort of a little delirious. The person in the bed next to her started speaking Russian. We have a lot of Russians living in Israel. And she started speaking Russian then. And it turns out that when she was growing up in this town, what she told me was that her father was a mayor or had some kind of official capacity, which allowed her to go to the Russian school. Otherwise, Jewish girls did not have any education. The boys studied Torah and things, and the girls were not educated, but she did. So she learned Russian, and she was able to, I guess, remember it. But she also, interesting, she expressed that it was really a terrible situation because she was the only Jewish gal in the class, and she would sit there, and they had these wooden desks that the seat in front was attached to the desk behind, and the desk behind had an inkwell, and the desk behind had a very cruel little Russian boy who used to take her pigtails and stick it in the inkwell. She related that story to us.
Wow. Now, do you know if my grandmother, if Bessie went to that school too? Because
No, none of them went to this school. No.
That was just your mother. That's interesting. I didn't know
that. My mother,
yeah.
Because she was, I guess, at the right age, or I'm not sure why, but she was the only one who went.
Now, did she or Hannah or any of the siblings? So so Hannah was born in 1890. Your mother was born in 1905. There were 5 siblings altogether. Did any of them tell you stories about your their grandparents? It's interesting to hear about your grandparents, but did you hear anything about
No.
Hannah and Rose's grandparents?
My mother used to speak of her parents when they were in the United States. Because they came and they lived here they came in 1905 and they each died. I'm looking on the list. They each died like in 1933 and 1930. So they were here. They were here, and the family was all living together, except your grandmother. She was in Brooklyn, but the rest of the family got off the boat in Ellis Island, and Uncle Avi took them to Newark and got them all set up there.
So I was going to ask you about that. So it was a long trip, and I do want to ask you about the trip as well. But before we get to the trip and then how they established themselves in the States, Jonathan and Deena, did you hear stories? Did you sit and listen to stories from your grandparents, Rose and Dave, about what it was like in Russia, about the trip? What did you hear when you grew up? Because Rose and Dave lived a long time. They both lived into their 80s. So did you hear anything from them?
The truth is, not that much. And I think when I was speaking to my grandmother, I was much more interested in how I can get some more blintzes out of her than where she was from. But I do know, they had the Russian and art, and my grandfather was more interested in me reading to him in Hebrew or talking to us about famous Jewish literature like Bialik writers than more about telling about his time in the old land. And my grandmother, not too many stories there. No.
I actually remember every time my grandparents used to come visit us in Oceanside, we always loved when they put us to sleep because they always tell us stories about the time in the shtetl. I remember them rubbing my back and telling me stories. Those are good bed night stories. I remember my stories of the shtetl. Not all of them were happy ones. I do remember, I'm kind of mixing up probably the stories you see on like Fiddle in the Roof kind of thing, but they were not always happy stories, but certain things I do remember making very important to talk to us about and share with us their previous life over in Russia. So, but not very, I don't remember details, unfortunately. But I do remember the moments of coming and scratching my back and telling me stories in bed. Unfortunately, not the details.
It's interesting. I didn't really dig into the stories until, and I was sharing this with you yesterday, Sheila. I started driving, and once I was 17, I would make a point of driving into Brooklyn every about once a week, and I would spend an entire afternoon. And my grandfather, Saul, Bessie's husband, he didn't pass away until 1995, so I got to spend a few years with him as a young adult. And he would always take the main stage. but he was a young boy when he became a part of the family. He was only 16 years old when he and my grandmother met. So he heard all of those stories. And then, but when Saul passed away, my grandfather, I called him Zeta, when he passed away in 95, whenever I'd go back, I was living in California by that time. I would spend days with my grandmother, and it was amazing how clear her memory was. She had one story when it must have been one of the last years that they were there, and she said the pogroms would often happen right after Easter. The Passion, they would have the Passion plays for Easter, and then the weeks after that would be a lot of the worst pogroms. And she said one year, her and her little sister, who was also named Rosie, would they hid in a haystack for an entire day, if not longer.
Yeah, that's the same story of my mother. That was the same story.
And when she came out, Baba, I called my grandmother Baba. She had Baba and Rosie had a neighbor friend about their age, and her neighbor, the little girl, came out with the heads of her parents in her hands. So that's how brutal it was. Now, you alluded to this, Sheila, but do you know? You've already mentioned that there were pogroms, and that's one story. And historically, we know that at least tens of thousands of Jews were killed by pogroms between the years 1917 and 1921. But do you know the circumstances that led up that to the family finally deciding to leave?
Well, the family just thought of leaving early on in like 1914, 1915, when they sent one of their sons over to the United States to make the money to bring them over, because living was just, it was not good living. There was a lot of poverty, and there wasn't a lot of leaving. It's interesting to mention that one of my uncles, one of your grandmother's siblings, or your great-grandmother's siblings, Harry, was in the Russian army in World War I. And he went away as a young man into the army, and my mother was much younger. And my mother tells this really beautiful story that she was walking on a Saturday morning, a Shabbat morning, and the whole family was in synagogue. They were all quite observant and religious in that town. And she went to the bakery to take out the what we call chunks. It's food that's cooked for 24 hours. So the Jewish people used to make the food up on Friday afternoon, put it in the oven at the baker, and then Saturday take it home and have a hot lunch, which we still do too sometimes. And she was walking home with this pot, and she must have been, I don't know, 10 or 11. And this ragged soldier, came up to her and said, "Do you happen to know where the Blech family lives?" That's her family. And she said, "Yeah, that's my family. Who are you?" And then he realized who she was. He says, "I'm your older brother." He was away for 4 or 5 years in the Russian army.
Oh, wow.
And that was another reason that my uncle went to the States to get out, going into the army, because it wasn't a very good situation. So that's a very nice story that we hear about the family.
It's interesting to hear that, because I didn't know which uncle was part of the Tsar's army, but we had politically active relatives, and the first part of the 20th century leading into World War I. We had my uncle Saul Krivals was very active in the Zionist movement. Allan already talked about other family members that were active in the early Zionist movement. But I think, and I want to check with other family members about this, but I think some were early sympathizers of, or were sympathizers with an early version of the Bolshevik movement before there was the Bolshevik Revolution. But then obviously there came a time during the revolution where my grandmother, and I think Rose would tell me this, or the same thing, where there were the Tsar's army, there was the Bolsheviks, there were the Cossacks. They all hated each other, but the one thing they all agreed on is they all hated the Jews. So,
but the Jews had to serve. The boys had to serve.
Yeah.
Very often they cut off a finger or do those things not to get in. There's another story of the pogroms. Uncle Aby sent this large amount of money to the family to get out, and they hid the money in their garden. And they all went out
in the garden, you said?
Garden, in the ground. So they hid the money in the ground in the ground to hide it. And then they were all out. And when they came back, they found that their neighbor's house was burnt down and all the people were killed. And because the Cossacks or the government thought that the money was in the other house. No, and they were all killed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then they left.
Wow. So that we know that the other thing is that I'd heard that there was some prominence that our family had, had some prominence there. You had mentioned that your grandfather was like a mayor of that shtetl.
Yes, definitely.
And I think my Baba told me that my grandmother told me that not her father, but her grandfather had owned mills, like they owned businesses, whether it was mills or merchants, that they were established. So it wasn't like they were leaving, over the last decade plus that they were there. Obviously, they experienced great poverty, but it wasn't like, they left something. They were leaving a life where our family had been for generations upon generations. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I did some research and I found that Jews were had been in that region for 1,000 years, 800 to
sure.
Yeah. So what do you know of the actual trip? Because there were several legs of the trip. It wasn't like, oh, we're leaving Cherny Ostriv, we're gonna, arrive in New York the next day, or it was like
all the Jews from that area of the world, when they left their countries, they went to Warsaw, and they had to spend quite a bit of time in Warsaw. And there, in Warsaw, the Jewish organization from the States called HIAS, which is still in existence now, helping immigrants, would go in and help them get their papers, get passports, which we still have all their passports, get their whatever, if you needed, paperwork. And so they had to spend actually 6 months there. My father at a different time had the same thing, and my mother, and they were there for 6 months in Warsaw. And then from there, they were all taken to France, where they boarded their boats and got to the United States on March 3rd, 1921.
1921. Yeah, March 3rd, 1921. I didn't realize that there was a stay in Warsaw. It's interesting because Poland is accepting a lot of immigrants from Ukraine today. What's happening in Ukraine today?
Yeah, well, and their passports, actually, which we have, says citizenship says Poland.
Oh, wow.
And the ship's manifest, which I have here, also says.
Now, I thought
it says both. It says both. It says some of them say Cherny Ostriv and some says Poland, the same family.
Now, where does Amsterdam come in? I thought that
that's where the boat is. That's where the boat left. So
okay.
The boat.
It left from Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, right.
So it was really a whole journey. It was the better part of a year. They must have left.
Yeah, probably.
In the spring or summer.
With no communication, really. I guess you could write a letter, but I don't know. Maybe the post was better then than now.
So once they got to America, we had mentioned that that there was a little brother. Hannah's son was a baby, and he died on Ellis Island. So there was a whole family. There were 5 siblings. So who was on that trip? Of the siblings, Hannah and her husband, Chaim Rubin, Rosie.
There's a whole family. There's your Hannah and her 3 kids, and Harry. He wasn't married. Harry was there, and my mother and her older sister May. So they were all there, and plus a whole list of other people. I have the manifest here. A whole list of other people from the same town. So they all traveled together.
Oh, wow.
The whole family.
did your parents meet here in the or in the
Yeah, the United States much later.
much
Yeah,
later?
Wait, can I
Yeah.
just, I'd like to say, if I can jump in here for a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
Also on that boat, I think the most correct me if I'm wrong, was Abi's future wife.
Barushka.
Right.
Right. She was on the boat.
Right.
Too.
She was on the
She
boat
came
with
from
them.
the same town. She came from the same
Right,
town.
and I think they came together. So they were on the boat together. They knew her.
Abi was in the United States, Jonathan. He brought everybody over, but Brushka was
I understand. But
Right.
Brushka, the family that came over on the boat knew Brushka from the town. Right.
Because
So
her name was Callan Oscar Mirla Greenwald. That was her name.
Right, so she was on the boat. That's important.
Yeah, she was on the boat.
Barushka's in that picture that it's now an iconic family picture of the family when they're still in Ukraine in Cherny Ostriv.
That's the Krival family.
Yeah. So once the family was here, how did the family establish? There was some family that settled in Brooklyn and some family that settled in Newark.
Everybody went to Newark.
Okay.
Because what these immigrants did, especially if they came from the same town, is they all supported each other. So they would come off the boat and they would go to in this case they went to Newark, where there were other family members or acquaintances, and they were all taken in until they got set up. And your family went to Brooklyn. I'm not sure why. It's probably because the Krival connection. They went to Brooklyn. Everybody else stayed in Newark all their lives. Lives.
I'll have to ask my father about this because he knows more about the Krivals. But I think my uncle Saul had gotten here, and he and one of his brothers set up a grocery store, or maybe I think one set up a grocery store, one set up a bar that Saul ran for years and years. But how did your family establish? How did the Blick side of the family establish itself? Like business wise, like how did they ultimately support themselves, and how did they get established?
I really don't know. I know what happened with what my father did, but that's a different story. But I have no idea. I guess Abi was maybe working. I mean, he was a house painter, but I don't know if he was working then. But they all, I don't know. They were. I guess the young men. I don't know. I really don't know what they did. I know that my mother went to night school, but my mother never had any formal education at all.
What about your father? Because where did Dave come from? Did he come from Russia?
He came from also someplace in Poland called Gritsov.
Okay.
Gritsov. So, but with my mother, I know what she did was she somehow studied English, because when I grew up with her, she was always reading. She actually gave me my love for reading, especially Pearl Buck and Reader's Digest. I don't know if any of you remember that, but Reader's Digest, she was a big fan of that.
It was right next to the TV guide.
And she pushed herself to learn English and she was able to write. It wasn't great, but she was able to write. And then eventually she was working as a secretary at the Westinghouse.
What about your father? What did your father do professionally?
My father came over when he was a young...
Sheila, to tell the story with your father, on one hand, about the first time he saw light in his life when he went to Warsaw.
Okay.
And the other aspect, that Harry worked in the store and lived in his business with him.
That was later on. Okay, my father came from a small town, and he was he came to the United States when he was 18 or 19, and his father had died when he was 13. I think now it must have been of the flu epidemic in 1918.
Oh.
And my father had two older sisters, a mother and a younger sister who was like a year old. And my father became the man of the family, and they had a terrible time getting out of Ukraine. And he tells how he had to carry his little sister under a wagon to get away. And they went to Warsaw. And this is the story Allan wants to take, which is a very wants me to tell, which is a moving story. My father was, I think he was 18 or 19. He said he got to Warsaw the first night, and he was walking down the street, and all of a sudden the street lights went on. Now, he came from a town in Ukraine with no electricity. They had no electricity, nothing. And he was walking, I'm gonna cry. He was walking down the street and the lights went on, the street lights went on. And all of a sudden he saw this light. And he said, this is what I want to do. I want to make light for people. Oh. And he became an electrician. He became an electrician. He took the family to the States. He took him. I mean, he was the one. He got himself apprenticed to Lightning Electric, an electric company in downtown Newark, and he became a certified electrician. And he worked all those years giving people light. He was really, really good. He loved that work. And then later on in life, he opened up a electrical appliance store with Uncle Harry. And they had a store for quite a while, But interesting enough, somehow the Blick family and my father's family wound up living on the same house in Newark, in the same apartment house. It was kind of strange. I mean, that's what happened. But the families, and then there were a lot when everybody got there were a lot of other family members, first cousins, second cousins, aunts and uncles, and they all kept and supported each other. And I remember going to visit some aunts, Tante Greenfield. It was a dark house, but we used to have to go there every Saturday, the whole family. And then later in life, when we were all separated, we used to go out to Brooklyn on almost every other Saturday or Sunday to visit the family. The families were very, very close in those days, very close. They lived near each other and they supported each other.
Now, you mentioned that in Cherny Ostriv, in Russia, or now it's Ukraine, the family was very observant. Once we got to America, how observant? I guess different people had different levels of observance, Jewish observance, right? Or was everybody what we would think of as conservative or Reformed Jew?
There wasn't anything like that. I don't know. I think they all lit candles because I inherited the candlesticks. In the old country, every Jewish woman who got married got candlesticks. If Allan would go upstairs and bring the candlesticks down, he could show them to you. Everybody got the same set of candlesticks. So if you go around in Jewish homes, you very often see those candlesticks. Or if you go to museums in Krakow or whatever, you see the same. And so I knew they lit candles, and I actually have Hanukkah candlesticks, and my candlesticks. So I think I gave to my daughter Laura, and now they're waiting for somebody else who wants them. But in the meantime, they're passed around, and their family. You'll see them in a lot of families. So I think they might have lit candles, but I don't think there was anybody in the family who was observant or anything like that. Not in my family. I mean, we became later in life our own way of observing, but I don't think anybody. They were connected.
Yeah, my family. It's funny because my family kept kosher. We went to an Orthodox synagogue. Now I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to skip about 50 years of family history because I want to skip forward to when I remember the 70s. I remember you were still here. Your family was still here for Deena's bat mitzvah because I went to Deena's bat mitzvah. I remember going. I don't know if it was the same day. I think it was a different visit to your house in Long Island. But I remember the men were playing basketball in the backyard, and Jerry broke his leg.
Right. That was a different visit.
Different visit. Yeah. And then we also had a family trip. All of us went to a house in Vermont. Do you remember that? All of us, all the cousins, Stephen and Andrea. And so you were here. But what I wanted to ask you, again, I'm skipping forward a long ways here. So you were here, you were established, and you decided to make aliyah. and again, different. I don't know if I'm even pronounced. When we're in shul, we say you make aliyah. You go up to the bima and you read a Torah portion. But aliyah is a big thing. It's also going up to Israel. So what, Sheila, Allan, any of you, if you want to explain, tell me how to say it properly when you're making aliyah, and then
You're
explain
saying,
it.
you're saying it right. You're saying
Okay.
it right.
All right.
Aliyah, why we went?
Yeah.
Well, I must correct. We weren't a religious family, but we were. My family grew up. We had kosher home, and so did Allan's family, and we observed all the holidays, and the holidays was a big family thing. And when Allan and I were bringing up our kids, we were very active in the conservative movement. We belonged to a synagogue, and our kids went to a conservative day school, which means they studied Hebrew subjects in half a day and regular subjects in the other half. And so we were always very involved in Zionist activities, helping Israel, enjoying the Israeli culture and all those things. And at one point, when I was a housewife on Long Island, not able to work because I was a biologist, not able to work because of the physical situation, and Allan was involved in a family business, which was quite hectic. All of a sudden, we just, after a visit to Israel where Deena had her bat mitzvah, the second bat mitzvah, and Allan's father was buried, we decided just to pick up and leave and make a change in our life. It was the right time for us. We were the right age. Children were still at the right age. They were 13, 11, and 8. And so we just actually picked up and moved to a very small town near where Jonathan lives now, in the south of Israel. It was very, very small, where my very dear friend from camp, who I knew from way, way, way back in camp days, was living with her family. And that's where we came, and we were very happy here. I got a job at the university. Allan was doing his consulting, and the kids were very happy. I think you were very happy.
So Deena, you were already early teenager, weren't you? And Jonathan, you probably middle school or close to middle school?
I was 11. I was 11 years old. I finished 5th grade. I came after 5th grade.
Yeah, but Deena, you were a little older. You were already bat mitzvahed. How was that for you? I mean, that's a pretty big move, especially for kids. Now all your kids are past that age. How was that for both of you?
I can say that it was a great move. And I look back at it, we're very happy to move here. I was 13, went to 8th grade. Very happy to move. I was happy in the States, but the move here was great. My parents took us to Omer, which is a great town down south, nice and warm. All the cold weather was left in the United States. Sorry, you can't really see me right now. But it was a great move. And until this day, I'm very happy. And thank God my 4 children live here in Israel with us. So you got me. I'm happy about the big move.
Yeah. What about you, Jonathan? Because you were about to become a teenager and bar mitzvah. And, it's a critical age for kids. How are you with the move?
I think I like the idea.
Okay.
I like the idea. On a sarcastic, not sarcastic, funny thing. The only thing I do regret is not seeing the New York Islanders win the Stanley Cup. As soon as we left, they won 4 straight Stanley Cups.
That's right. You guys lived on the island, on Long Island, and they went on to win 4 in a row after that.
Right, season tickets and everything. Yeah, it wasn't pretty in that way. But other than that, it was okay. But the reality is, and I can see it now as I grow up, and I have my family here, and the first cousins, and my kids have their aunts and uncles here. We did leave the United States, and we came to Israel, and we did not have direct family. We had second cousins through cousins that became very close. But yes, we left. The grandparents stayed back in the United States, aunts and uncles, all the first cousins, and most of, and the cousins that we grew up, just like with you guys, you and Eddie and your family, that part, thinking back, is, and I can see what we have now here, that was a big thing that we're missing. But other than that, a good move.
Yeah. No, Israel, it was a big trip. I mean, we went once as a family, and it was a big deal. We were there for Laura's bat mitzvah.
Right, right. It was great.
Yeah, that year, I guess it was summer of 1983, right? Was that?
Right. That's
Yeah.
Corey, I'd like to add that both families, Sheila's family, Sheila's parents, and my parents, even though they lived in New Jersey and in Brooklyn or Newark, they were both very active in the labor Zionist movement. And that's where let's say, the bug of Israel came from to us. I can even remember in 1979 when we came on aliyah to Israel. And remember when we made our decision roughly a year before that, because it took us a year to put the package together with etc. I remember speaking to my in-laws, and my father-in-law in particular, and saying, I hope you're not mad at us, for leaving you, here and going away. And his comment was, how can I be mad at you? I've been a Zionist all my life, and you're fulfilling a dream, so that I certainly cannot be mad at you for doing something that was my dream of a lifetime.
Yeah. I always looked at it as heroic, frankly. That was my perception as you were doing so, especially once we got into our. Deena was the first to go and go through Army and then Jonathan and Laura. So I always thought, especially that part of it was heroic, and that it was an ideal that was being fulfilled. I missed hanging out with you guys because we were all relatively close in age. I was very close in age with Laura. I have to say, though, that Laura was brilliant, and she always intimidated me with how smart she was. So, but we were the close. I think we were maybe 6 months apart, if that, because she was born in 71 as well.
She was born in March. Yeah.
I was always a little afraid of her. Not afraid, but definitely intimidated with how smart and brilliant she is. So okay, I have to ask you. How involved in politics are you? Do you stay engaged? We don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but this is my specialty.
I think it's really a difficult thing to talk about now. I'll tell you one thing: being American new immigrants, and you never lose that status, or at least Allan and I haven't. It was very hard to break into any kind of politics. Allan did try for a while and got active in one of the smaller parties. But it's really is basically a small, what do you call it? It's not a boys' club, whatever it is, that's based on Army service. When you served in the Army, you grew up in the Army like Rabin and all those people. You have that background, and those things still stick now. So it was hard to break in. And also, as Americans, we had completely different values. We didn't even understand the crazy system here. And we tried on our local levels. Each of us got involved. Laura was very involved in her community. She was on the community board and all those things, working a lot for education and things. But to get into politics here is a crazy, crazy thing. And the political situation as of today couldn't be worse. So what Allan and I and our peers, we say now there's nothing we can do about it. We're leaving it to the next generation, and I hope they manage to get through it and do something about it, because it's just as bad as it could be.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Okay, let's not get into politics, but I want to give my father some credit here also, Mom. One daddy was also an officer in the Israeli army. They came and he went into the army, even though he was older. We have to give him credit for that. It's a big deal. Charles also was an officer in the army, which is also a very, very big deal, very prominent officer, actually. My father in the States was very involved with the labor Zionist movement, which is what also still to the day is a movement here in Israel. He came from the United States to Israel as representative of the United States in different conferences here in Israel throughout the years. And until this day, he's a loyal labor member. So I give him a lot of credit for someone who's been very, straight in his opinions and his ways throughout all the years. Politics is a very sensitive issue in the family. We all have various opinions. This whole country got various opinions. I personally keep myself way out of politics if possible. I have a husband who's very much involved, and I just don't talk about it because it's better for me that way. Hopefully, I'm just praying that things will be okay. And people who know what they're doing are involved. Hopefully, they're making the right decisions, even though who knows. But everyone has their way of handling politics. My personal opinion is not to get involved.
Fair enough. That's why I started. One of the reasons I started the podcast is so that we could figure out how to talk, have better, healthier conversations across our differences. Most of my family, very much here in the States, very much anti-Trump. I hate Trump, although I consider myself fairly conservative especially when it comes to fiscal issues. So I hold certain positions, even some social issues. I hold certain positions that my parents in particular don't agree with, or some of my friends in the entertainment industry tends to be very, very progressive, liberal, if you will. And I hated the fact that, if I brought up one issue that sounded conservative, that a lot of other assumptions would be made, or folks would get aggressive with me about other positions. So I just, one of the reasons I started this was when it comes to religion and politics, we should be able to have better conversations when we disagree, especially when we disagree with each other. So, but I was curious. I've been curious to talk to you about this. So one of the first excuses, if you will, that a lot of my friends from church would say that they support Trump is because of all that he's done for Israel. And Trump is the first one to talk about how popular he is. 85% approval rating in Israel. And, so I was curious how you felt about Trump, about things like moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. How did that resonate with you in Israel?
Yeah, I'll answer. I'll start for me. I am extremely anti-Trump because of what he stands for, what he does, how he acts. He moved the embassy. Actually, it's not such a big deal. It's not such a big deal. Doesn't mean very much. Allan and I are representatives of the American Embassy in the South. In other words, we help people who have some problems if they need some kind of. So we visit the embassy once a year. It's a very small, nice little building, and they mainly give out passports. Where the Tel Aviv one is the big one on the sea, and it's really very insignificant. He made this big move. And it's all very nice, but it didn't really do anything. He started the connection with the Arab countries, which was just really wonderful. But from there, natural things kept going. Now it's expanding. There's wonderful things happening. The Israel Symphony just played in Dubai. Okay. The Israel Symphony just played in Dubai. And they played both national anthems there. So and afterwards, what he did when he was in office and with his followers, it didn't really affect anything. It just embarrassed me or got us mad. And as far as the money and the support, that comes from the Congress, which has always been pro-Israel, thankfully. That's my opinion. And I don't wish him terribly bad, but I wish him that he just stay down in his little hideaway. And
I'm curious if there's any dissenters here, if there's any Trump fans or we haven't even talked about Bibi, Netanyahu. So I'm curious I'm going to start stirring. I want to stir up trouble.
I thought you weren't going to talk politics.
No. We're talking politics. We're doing it. Oh. Jonathan, tell me.
Right, to let Jonathan talk.
Well, here's what I think about the Trump part. First of all, for me, a big deal, the embassy, that it's in Jerusalem. A big deal. I think Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. We decided that it's the capital of Israel, the people that live here. And I don't think anybody else has a right in the world to say that we don't recognize your capital. So, and embassies should be in capitals. So I love it, the fact that the embassy is now in Jerusalem, whether it's not, even if it's a smaller office. I love that. Now, Trump, it's true. A big,
and for the record, Deena is nodding in agreement. So go on, Jonathan.
Okay. as far as Trump was a big supporter of Israel, I agree with that. But I think what the problem with Trump became is that there was, and my mother said this, I think correctly. She said Congress and the Democrats and Republicans, since Israel was established, have always been supportive of Israel. Always we have big support. Yeah, sometimes criticism, sometimes there's problem, but always the United States has Israel's back. And that was a consensus. And what happened, I think, in the Trump administration was that because there was so much anti-Trump and there was such a big difference between Democrats and Republicans, that because Trump was so pro-Israel, all of a sudden that consensus was like, oh, if you like Israel, you're a Republican. If you don't like it, you're a Democrat. So it's almost like there became a problem with Congress also, because Democrats didn't want to agree with Republicans even on anything because of Trump, and that included Israel. And I think that was bad for us. And hopefully now, when Biden's there right now, that I think is settling down. So that's how I take the Trump administration.
That's an interesting take. It's interesting to hear it from your perspective. Yeah.
I want to add something.
Sure.
About our. There's a lot of people ask us about. Our relationship as our family, our children and our grandchildren, our relationship to the United States. I just want to say that we are all citizens of the United States, and we got citizenship for our grandchildren based on what they call the grandparent law. If you can prove that a parent or a grandparent lived in the United States for more than 5 years, over the age of 14, the grandchildren were entitled for U.S. citizenship. So all 9 of our grandchildren became our United States citizens. And all 9 of our grandchildren and my children and Allan and I, we vote in every election that we're able to vote in. And the absentee ballot, but we all vote. And in order for the grandchildren to vote, they always get civic lessons from me to understand what they're doing and how the United States runs. And we feel ourselves active United States citizens, and we all pay taxes.
Oh, okay.
Oh yes. Yep.
So how about is there broad consensus? Everybody loves Bibi Netanyahu, or
everybody? I don't know who's going to answer that question. I think we should just pass it.
I will answer that question. That there is I come from a family who has we're 9 of us now, and all of us vote in the large spectrum from left to right to in the middle. We're all over the place. My family, very facilitated. Everyone has their own opinion here, which is wonderful. There are wonderful things that Netanyahu did over the years for Israel. A lot of things I can highly respect he did. I'm not really sure it's the right thing what's happening right now, and what time will tell with this new government coming in. At the moment, it's kind of scary. But he's a person who has a lot of, he has, over the years, has done amazing things for the country. Not everyone agrees with him. I think he's done amazing things for the country. And he's a very bright and amazing perspective in the whole economy with the money, financial things. He's done good things for the country. Obviously, now we have to see what's going to happen. This country has been, besides for the government now is coming in, thank God, being sworn in from the government. We haven't had a stable government here for many years already. So we're all very optimistic. Somehow this will go through as a stable government, will last more than a year. And if he's the person to do it, may it be. Hopefully it'll be something that'll be good for the country, not too many. I think we'll see what happens. We'll talk next year and 2 years from now. If this government holds up, then maybe, hopefully, there'll be some good news. And then some other people will come up, when they rise up from below. So the next election, another 4 years from now, will be more opportunities to choose for other people that will be more easy to choose for and to vote, because the voting is getting a little difficult around here.
I'd like to add, Corey.
Yeah.
One of the things, even though I'm not particularly fond of Netanyahu, but one of the things I have to give him credit for is he managed on behalf of Israel to set up special relationships with all of the countries in the Gulf, whether it's Bahrain and Kuwait and Abu Dhabi and Dubai, etc. And that's been now of late, including Morocco, and said that a lot of the negativism with Muslim countries has started to disappear. I mean, there's always people on the left and the right. You can't help that, just the way it goes. But we got to give him credit for something that was really wonderfully accomplished. Israel now has regular flights to Morocco. Sheila and I actually visited Morocco. We had a wonderful time. Went to synagogue there, and it's just and like I couldn't believe I was in a place that was supposedly anti-Israel at one time. It's such a positive change.
Yeah. So Deena and Jonathan, are your kids are now young adults? Have they begun getting involved in politics or interested in political issues? And where do your kids stand?
Well, I can talk for my kids. I can say that the fact that life is, we've been doing a lot of politics here in the country. I keep joking about it that my son is my youngest is 21. When you vote, he voted. His first time he voted was exactly 18 was the elections at that time. He was 18 years old. And since then he's voted 5 times. It's kind of like a joke about the fact. I mean, just really, it's too. I mean, it really puts in proportion how much. So yes, every year pretty much we get together and we have this discussion. Usually we invite our kids over for a big barbecue on election day, and we've had them over in the last 5 years many times. It's getting really ridiculous, but yet everyone has their own personal opinion. Conversations do come up, especially certain issues that they come up in the news. Usually we don't try to talk politics in the house, especially not with my parents, because I know my family is a little more right wing. They're definitely more left wing. I'm like center right wing more, and they're more definitely left wing. So we try as family get together. We try not to avoid politics. But to enjoy the evening together. I personally keep away from politics, so that's my personal thing.
What about you, Jonathan?
No, not much. My kids are in their early 20s, mid 20s, and we don't talk too much about politics. Again, everybody has a lot of experience after voting so many times in the last few years, but not too much talking about politics. I think people are more interested maybe on a local level what they can do, maybe in your own town or in your own area, maybe be able to do things and influence that way, but not much on the country level. We don't go into it that much.
But everybody votes as opposed to...
Oh, Lord, yeah, everybody votes. Everybody
votes.
Yes.
And how would you describe yourself, Jonathan? Like fiscally conservative in terms of military involvement? Are you a hawk? Are you a dove? Like, how would you describe your own disposition?
Good question.
I don't know. I think that in general, in Israel, I think that the majority of even the parties that are out of the 120 members of our parliament, our Knesset, I'd say that most of them are somewhere in the middle, and most of them have pretty much the same ideas, a little bit more to the left, a little bit more to the right about how Israel should be financially, military, and all the socially, and pretty much the same. But what happens is people want to be in power, and then they give in to extremists on the right and the left, and it's not even right and left. It just could be, just people that have just interests of their own. I don't consider people here like in Israel that are religious, that have the religious parties that are trying to take care of the ultra religious people. I don't consider them right or left. I just consider them they're taking care of what they want. And I think that if we could have put the middle together of the people that are not extremists, we would be a lot better off. But that doesn't seem to be a reality, and I wish it was that. I wish it was that way.
Yeah.
It's just not.
There's one caucus in the United States Congress called the Problem Solvers Caucus, and I wish that it's Republicans and Democrats, and they're focused on solving problems as opposed to caving into the radical extremes of their respective parties. And my hope is that a caucus like that one gains more leverage in the coming years. But right now, it seems like the extremists are the ones that have the loudest voices, and it seems to be a pattern around the world.
I want to go back to the family.
Yeah.
To go back to the family in I can remember the 1950s and 60s. And, you could be asking the same questions. Were they involved politically? What were their thoughts? What were their this? I don't think the family, my family was always Democrat. I can always remember my mother when in 52 listening to Stevenson on the television, maybe on the television, but saying, with a man like that, he has to be president. Of course, she wasn't. But they weren't really involved in politics. They were involved they all voted.
Yeah. But
I don't ever remember any kind of working for any of the parties or even, most of whoever did it, they worked for Zionist causes, or they had their own groups that they met together and had these high level literary discussions. And then they had cemetery plots where and there were different, Aby was in the working circle, which was further right, and my parents and Allan's parents were in the labor Zionist movement, which was, we were never involved in politics. We never spoke about although I grew up as a Democrat, and it's remained so. But I never remember any kind of activism in any of the families.
Yeah.
And they had to become citizens. They had to all study and become citizens and take the test, and their citizenship papers are the exact same piece of paper as my grandchildren got. They look exactly the same, which is interesting.
It's funny because now that you're mentioning that, my father was very politically active.
Yes, he was he was.
But all the other members of my family, their political activity had more to do, like my grandparents, my Baba and Zayda, Bess and Saul. They would send money to the family that was still in Ukraine, that was still,
right.
And as they called it, Russian. That was their political, or Uncle Sal on the Krival side. He was very active with Israel, and he still, he went to Israel on a regular basis. But I don't remember a lot of conversations. I asked my grandmother one time, and she said, "We're Jewish, of course, we're Democrat." I'm like, "What? I don't know." But I think that's being children of the Depression, and then World War II, and them coming of age during the Roosevelt era. So I think that's what it had to do. We're Jewish, of course, we're Democrat. I didn't know what that one thing was connected to the other. But okay, so I have a couple more questions. Before we wrap up. I usually, when a famous person comes on here, I say, how can we find you online and all the great work that you're doing? And you're famous to me. But instead of asking how people can find you online, I was going to ask you if there's a particular charity that you'd like to advocate for, and then we'll include the URL, how to find it in our show notes. Is there a particular charity that you want to give a shout out to?
I can answer that very easily. As you know, your cousin and our daughter Laura died a number of years ago. And Laura, in her married life, was very active in our synagogue in Omer. And Allan and I are very active in the synagogue. And we set up a fund. We call it the Laura Fund, Laura Charity Fund. And the money that comes into this fund is used exclusively to help people of need in the Negev, children, cancer organizations, families that are in need, organizations that give other help to other people in need, like Jonathan's active in this organization that runs a summer camp for children with cancer and their siblings. And we give money exclusively to these places in the south of Israel, in the Negev, because in our system, what's happened in this country, that it seems that the major amount of contributions and money has been going to the center of the country, and the periphery, as we call it, up north and down south, don't get as much help. So we use that, and I can send you the information, and the money is used exclusively to help people and organizations who are working with people in the South.
Okay. So yeah, please do make sure to send me the URL and the how we can find it. I will be sure to include that in the show notes So however you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or anything else, be sure to check the show notes, and we'll include easy ways to find that charity.
Just for the record, the money is donated to a registered nonprofit organization in Israel, and it's transferred via either the Conservative Movement or the PEF Israel Endowment Fund, so that an American making a contribution that ultimately goes to this fund is considered a bona fide tax-deductible charity by U.S. government on their
Great.
statements.
Terrific. So I interviewed a journalist recently that said that told a story about her mother, who was a lawyer, and taught her one of the best lessons that she could have learned as a journalist, which is, before you wrap up any interview, ask, are there any questions that I should have asked? Is there anything else that if I ask the question that you wanted to tell me? So that's for, there's me, and then Allan, Sheila, Deena, and Jonathan. What should I have asked, and what should we have covered that we haven't covered yet?
But it's not really a question, but I think it should come out of the importance to us, and I'm talking about my children, and I think my grandchildren now, and to us, and to the rest of the family, which I saw when we got ourselves all together, the importance of family.
Yeah.
Because I think that was the strong thing, no matter where you live. And nowadays it's much easier to keep in touch. But that's the important thing, to, be considerate of each other, think about each other, support each other, and love each other, no matter where you live in the world.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, no, we talked about that a little bit yesterday, having a sense of connection, having an understanding of who we are as a family, who we are as a people. I remember one day, it was a few years ago, and you corrected me, Sheila, it was Bobby Barad who got the information about Bess and Rosie's baby brother who died on Ellis Island. And when I read the information, the little short story that Bobby Barad found, I cried my eyes out. And my kids were little at the time. One of my kids, I think it was Savannah, it was either Savannah or Jackie Boy, who walked in and saw me crying. And it was just this sense of connection, this big question mark that I had, because my Baba sometimes referred to her little brother, and we didn't have any meat on the bones, if you will. We didn't know any reality to it. So even finding the grave where he was buried, meant a lot. But I really appreciate, Sheila, you're very good about sending out updates around holidays. And it does, for me over here in California, it gives me a sense of feeling connected. We've been apart for so long in terms of miles, but these last few years, it's been really great to feel a sense of connection. And I really appreciate it. And this, even just this conversation has been a real treat for me. So it's been great seeing everybody, and I love you. And
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, I'd like to say shalom, which means hello or goodbye, but more importantly, it also means peace. And I look forward to the day when we can really smile and say we have peace in this world, which today, unfortunately, seems a little bit upside down.
Excellent. I couldn't think of a better way to end this episode. So as always, this is really special for me. I hope you appreciated it too. If you dig what we're doing here, please remember to subscribe, leave us a review or comments wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend about this podcast. Talking politics and religion without killing each other. We're really easy to recommend through our main website, www.politicsandreligion.us. That's politicsandreligion.us. Now go talk some politics and religion, just like we did today, with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.
Corey, can you call Lisa in so my kids can see her?
Oh, Lee.
Yeah.
Come here. Jonathan and Deena are here. This is going to be on the.
So
I think I'm going to save this part of the recording too.
Very good.
And now, hold on. Thank you for joining us today. If you dig what we're doing here, it is super easy to follow us. You can go to our site, politicsandreligion.us. That's with the and spelled out, A-N-D. politicsandreligion.us. And we're on all the socials at TP and R Pod. You know, TP and R Pod for Talking Politics and Religion Pod. And here's a big way you can support us, by becoming one of our patrons. You can even become a producer or executive producer of our program and have a lot more say in who we bring on, the kinds of questions we explore, or just help us keep the lights on. But mostly, we really appreciate you giving us a listen. So for the whole team here at Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.